As we get into the middle knuckle, I'll start off this section by telling you it's the one, that's why I call it the bane of my existence. It's the one piece on this whole glove that I've spent over the course of all these years spending the most time on, specifically trying to get right. It's, to this day, it's always kind of the most apprehensive piece that I look so forward to bending. It's just so tricky, and it's, out of all the fingers you're looking at, depending on the angle and all the stuff I've already talked about, it's the one that can change the most visually, depending on all the sources that we know I kind of gauge things by. So it's always something that has a little bit of trepidation. I think more so. Maybe the backplate has the next level of trepidation for me, but certainly the knuckle. As I'm setting us up here, I wanted to touch on two quick points. One, you can see the partially disassembled Becker clone. Actually, I'll touch on another point later, now that I think about it. Laying on the new Part 2 glove I'm using for a lot of this documentary. And I just want to touch on something. It is my new DESA glove. It's got the the cuff wrinkles and all the extra detail that I do now. But the color is not final. I want to really point that out. It is now my master glove, and it's master on a lot of levels. Color is not necessarily one of them at this point. So when we get to the the finishing of this glove and we start talking about the leather, it's going to be lighter. It's going to be more of a vibrant shift towards the yellow-orange pumpkin. It's a little brown. Even on my shit camera, it's a little too brown. So I'm well aware of that, and I'm just pointing out the area we're going to be focusing the first portion of this on. The application is a little bit different. The system is a little bit different of how I attack this particular piece. Each one has their own different attack. Anyway, so that was point one. Point two is I also wanted to touch base on one of these little details specific to the Part 2 and the Becker, the actual screen-used Becker glove, is that those two little holes drilled in the ring tip, and I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, but I wanted to talk about it. Really, and I've debated. It's not that important to me to include. I know a lot of people would say, "Oh my God, really?" Yeah, it's just not. Just like the extra hole on the right ring knuckle rivet area, it's not really that important to me. And I know to some guys it is, and I think that's really, really cool. I think that's a real evidentiary devotion to this craft. So I'm not poo-pooing it. I'm just saying, to me, I do. You see how much I do here. It's like the last thing I want to do is go, oh, fuck, now I got to drill these fucking holes. So I chose not to do it. Maybe one day I will, just for a goof. I know Mark Petrie over at Knife Gloves, who does the Avenger. I know he does them. Mark also goes. I mean, you want to talk about anal and obsessive. I'm not the only one. Mark, and Mark knows I respect the hell out of his work because it's very, very good. Here, I'm just kind of sizing up the metal here before we start actually applying this. He actually goes to the extreme of he'll add the little tooth marks, the toothing on the index blade area at the break point, which is left over from the original grinding of the original blades on screen. I think that's a really cool detail, actually. I really debated about doing that, but I thought, you know what, that's kind of Mark's thing. So I'm going to leave that to him, because he pioneered that. All right, so we're sizing up the middle, and, like I said, a lot of trepidation. You're going to notice something, too, I'm going to show you right here. And these two pieces, these are the same size, cut from the same template. But if you look closely, and I think I actually pulled up in camera at some point to demonstrate this, if you look closely at it, the piece I'm holding here will look substantially longer when I put it right next to it, right next to the DESA. And this is because, and this is, again, another reason why they're such a bitch to get down, all the pieces of this glove, really, from template to finished piece. This is because all the processes and the bending and the torquing of the metal shortens it up. I mean, look at how long it looks. I'm holding it bottom to bottom. And by the time, and you'll see me kind of testing this as I start bending it, and it'll shorten up and shorten up and shorten up. And it's just because there's such a fulcrum arc and dip coverage indent dip coverage on the knuckle flat. It shortens up a full 1/4 of an inch when you do this. So I wanted to point that out, and I'll be pointing it out further. And the other thing you also notice, it's much fatter, and obviously there's a reason for that. The reason being, we have to go in and create, the side reflections. I do those first, like I do on every single piece, whether it's the knuckle or the tips, and get that diameter spread a little bit tighter. So that's going to be the first thing we're going to do. And this, by the way, as I promised, I know I did a bit of a setup here, but this section is going to be much more fast-tracked. Less commentary, more, just straight on visual. This is what's going on. I'll point out a couple things as I'm doing it, where it's important. And, certainly getting this main shape is pretty important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it more in detail, and then we're going to kind of fast track forward. And as I cross dissolve, I'm not going to leave anything out, but a little quicker than the last section, because the last section was really important to do, the setup. So here we go, doing the side reflections, and again, for each piece, they have their, how can I explain this? The side, I'd love to call them side beams. The side reflections on the middle are a little closer to the center from either side of the piece than the index, and what you may have noticed, and for glove aficionados who know the actual glove really well, they'll know this, but for the new guys you might not, because your first inclination is to make all the fingers the same size. Well, they're not in terms of their diameter spread. The index is almost the fattest. Actually, if you want to know the truth, in some respects the pinky is the fattest looking down. But the index is fat. The knuckle is much more tapered. The knuckle is the most tapered at the bottom than the rest. The ring is, then again, fatter, and then the pinky is fattest at certain points. So it's I think, and that's probably Lou's, mismatching of, making it look a little crude, as he called it. It's been an interesting thing to tackle. And each piece has its own, reflection, seam shape. Does its own thing. In fact, you'll see in just a minute on this left side, I'll start the fine contouring, on this piece. This piece also, each one has a little streamlined, swoop and kind of really soft feathered shape to it. Some parts are more rigid, and there are also these bulges. Remember, I talked about force forming the metal between the creases, and each one has those on very subtle degrees, some more than others. And I find, frankly, that the middle has the most pronounced in most of the regards, except for one point on the ring. The ring has a really big bulge on it, and I'll show that to you next, obviously. But for the middle, once you create these side reflections and you've created you'll see me create the knuckle flat shape, I then go ahead and I force form most of the right side of this into, kind of like an off-centered tilt toward the right bank. I bulge the metal out there. It's got these bulges that come out of the rigid shapes at certain points. Think like a light bulb. Think of it like a light bulb. If you're looking at a light bulb, it's got that kind of shape to it, and it really does. And it's also angled more to the right. So it's like a right curve, like a spine. Like if you were to see a scoliosis, a very minor scoliosis aspect to a spine, and it's curved to the right. That's kind of how the middle is. So here we go. So I'm sizing this up, and I'm now making the first bend for that left side, and I do this very gently, because you see I'm not doing the crease. I don't flatten this out. I go right into the curved metal, and if you do it too hard, it's okay to leave a bit of a straight dent in there, because especially as you weather it, it softens up from the surface, but you can't go too far, because if it gets too dented, it ruins it. So you really have to do it subtly. And this shape is kind of like an arrowhead, an off-centered arrowhead. Like the left side is short, and then the right side is more elongated, if you were to look at how the reflection lays. So I'm creating the left side of that arrowhead, and it's on about a 5-degree angle upwards from the starting point on the side. And to get this shape, and now I'm sizing up another piece. This is one of my other pieces I keep on hand because the reflections are so strong. I like to work with it in conjunction with the DESA. The shapes are virtually identical. There are a couple minor differences that I know about when I do this, but again, this is why I keep these little pieces around. So now I'm creating the dip, the second indent, or the right side of the off-centered arrowhead, and bringing it down. And it's on a much stronger degree, and that degree is going to be backed off a little bit as I add more detail to the right side. But you want to get these two main, bump dents on this piece to start with, because it really sets the stage and it sets the tone for the rest of your shaping. And we're really going to get in there and do it, do even more. I'm going to go in and I'm really going to kind of indent this a little bit more and bring out other certain, ridges, and I'm going to get that little fold detail on the right there. But it's a long process. You really have to work the metal because, like everything else, each bend kind of affects each other bend. And I'm not going for total perfect shaping at this point. I'm going for getting the base shapes as close as I can, so I have the least amount of work to do when I refine them. But knowing that they're going to shift as I'm working this, it's at this point it doesn't give me any benefit to try and get it perfect. I'm just getting the main shapes, so I have that base to begin with. But you'll see it coming along. And also remember, as we're doing this, right now it doesn't look like it because I haven't really contoured this thing down totally. The shapes actually look pretty close from the undersides on either side, on the bottom. But remember, I leave myself some wiggle room, so there's extra metal there. And as soon as I really start contouring this down, you're going to see that get fatter and fatter right where the knuckle kicks up there and bends and goes into the body of the piece. You're going to see that starting to get much fatter than the DSA as I form the metal and as I contour it. And that's what's going to be filed off when I do the metal sculpting on this. And I already know there's a couple little sections, I talked before how I don't do a lot of pickup work on the fantails, but I mentioned that there were a couple portions where I knew full well that I'd made a couple goofs or I hadn't cut it quite right. Or I hadn't got the arc right. So I know on this section on the right-hand side, there's a little bit of fine metal sculpting I want to do on the underside fantail where it goes down toward the rivet. Really minor, by about 1 millimeter. I just want to tidy it up a little bit, so it's going to look a little different until I do that. You might not notice it. You might. All right, so it's getting shorter. You can see. And I'm, because I'm anal and obsessive compulsive, I'm making sure it's getting shorter, and it'll get shorter still as this process goes. And it just always amazes me when I watch this stuff, even on my own, how different it looks until it's all properly shaped. It just really does. Even though this looks pretty close, but to me, I'm looking at it and going, "Hey, Liz, doesn't look right yet." I obsess over this stuff like crazy, even when I'm building it. But frankly, as far as gloves go, if you want to talk about having a basic look to a glove and not going for this whole accuracy business that I and so many others do obsess about, this is actually probably good to go. If I was doing lesser, intense quality gloves, I would probably go, yeah, okay, done, cool, let's bolt it and move on. But I don't. You know what I mean? There's actually quite a bit of work left to do to this, so I'm glad I'm fast-tracking it. So here we go. Now I'm starting to add a little bit of the final detail. Tiny bit. Or start the areas of the final detail, squaring off that little section on the right. And it's amazing. I'm looking at it, and it's like that one move totally shifts it into like the more accurate area. Just that one little pinch, That's why this thing was, as much as hard as it was such a joy to actually do and figure out, to the point that I have, which again is not confirmed as accurate, which again could totally be wrong. I'm the first to agree with it. This is just how I see the glove. And that last part, man, that's going to kill me. There's this, I'll show you this in a little bit. Once all this shaping is kind of almost done, right on the top over the right-hand side of the knuckle flat, that right as it kind of comes into the flat area on the side swoop, like right there on the end from the top. On the right side of this, on the top, there's this little dent that goes right almost into the point of the top of the arrowhead on the right-hand side. It's so hard to get, and you can really fuck things up if you don't do it right. And it's only something you see in certain shots and in shadow, and it's just one of these details. I'm like, oh man, I could really just let that go, but I don't. And don't worry if, again, we're looking at it. Don't worry if you're looking at the right side of this thing and you're going, oh, the arrowhead brace is it's low, it's too low. Well, yeah, it is, because I haven't finished it yet. So believe me, I'm looking at it. By the end, these will match up. You know that by now, or pretty damn close. So if it doesn't match up right now, trust me when I say I'm well aware of all the inconsistencies at this point. Now I'm popping that up even more because it does come up. The flats tend to come up above the actual, if you're looking on a side angle, at certain points, at the most extreme points, they actually come up above the body of the piece in some areas, and then either they dip down or, but they're not just like straight on extensions of the body itself. On the side angle that I showed you on the last section of the index when I did the held shots. Alright, so I've done the basic shape now. Pretty close, actually. But this is just the beginning. So I leave this area now as is. I do the bottom bending. There's my other reference piece. I don't do the bottom bending. I don't do any of that now. Now I concentrate on the body itself, getting all those contours. And then in a little while, we'll get back to finish off the knuckle flats and bring this piece to its conclusion. And tonight's musical choice, if you can hear it, is the Russian chick downstairs and her house music. I have no idea if it's going to be bleeding into the microphone. But you can also see that, unfortunately, I have lost my natural daylight, so we're working under night conditions again. And it's important to note, as we continue now, I'm going to be focusing on the left side only for the duration of this portion of this segment. And that's the left side facing us if we're looking dead on from top. And as I pointed out in other areas of the documentary, certainly on the index, and as I said, each piece has its own attack pattern.